Hello and welcome to episode 12 of the Cloud Computing for the C-Suite show with Brad Nelson and internationally recognised and world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialists, placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. This week we are excited to have Ed Featherston as our special guest. Ed is Vice President and Principal Architect at Cloud Technology Partners. Hi Dave, and a warm welcome Ed. Great to have you both on the show this week.
Great to be here.
Yep, great to be here. Thank you for the invite. Enjoy the conversation.
Oh, fantastic. It's great to have you both here. In this week's show, we will be talking about the Financial Accounting Standards Board and its plans to propose new rules for dealing with cloud computing service costs. Will these changes take the accounting issue off the table when it comes to cloud computing, Ed?
It's a step in the right direction. I mean, it's always been a confusing mix once cloud came into the picture of how businesses deal with it from a cost perspective. In prior to the cloud days, it was very easy because you had your CapEx and depreciating the equipment that you had and depreciating the development you did on new applications. And when it went to the cloud, where cloud was touting itself as being just operational expense only, the accountants kind of went crazy and trying to figure out where they wanted to go with this and how they wanted to deal with it in the books. So these new announcements that came are a step in the right direction that I think are going to help people feel more comfortable in the accounting world as to how the costs are taken care of, in that they can start depreciating the new development into the cloud environment, which is something that they're used to dealing with and having on the books. But I think it's still going to be shaky ground for a while to come yet. But the fact that they're taking that step, I think, is going to be a huge impetus to continue getting it all resolved so that we can stop worrying about the bookkeeping numbers.
Yeah, and this is an article I wrote for InfoWorld, and I think it was probably the single most boring article I've ever written in my entire career. And really, but the reason is because I got so many clients that were asking about this, and they would get me in touch with the CFO, and the CFO would ask me, how do I treat this expense? And I'm like, I'm not a tax lawyer or a CPA. I'm a freaking geek, so I'm going to tell you how to build it and why you should build it. But as far as how you account for it in the books, that's something you're going to have to research on your own. And what I found was that the clients were taking different kind of ways of doing this. So sometimes they were deducting op costs as capital costs over time. They were treating it as a capital expense, and they gave me the justification for that, which sounded reasonable. And sometimes they were not treating it as a capital expense, and they gave me the justification for that, which also sounded reasonable. One of those had to be illegal. It was fine by me, as they're trying to build these things, and ultimately, I think the accounting industry needs to catch up with what cloud computing is. And so, in the past days, we bought hardware and software, we bolted them into a rack, and we could depreciate them. And the accountants loved the depreciation stuff because basically, it took money off of the net income. So in other words, provided them with a good tax deduction. Now that they removed buying the capital equipment, they lose the depreciation. They're still looking for a fair way to do that. And I think it's unfair to take away the depreciation of the systems if you're just, in essence, leasing the systems or differing the consumption model over the internet. And so this came kind of as an interesting way to me that I'm finally seeing the accounting community, I guess that's what it is, and you're moving in the right direction to give the CFOs and the accountants and the CPAs guidance that has, that can be rated in tax law. I'm sure this is going to probably get a court someplace, and precedents needs to be set and things like that. But we're starting to move in the right direction where we're not being penalized for leveraging cloud computing from a tax perspective. And I think that's a step in the right direction. So even though it was a very boring article, I think it was very important. Do you guys have accounting down there in Australia, Brad?
We certainly do have accounting down here. That's such a great, one of the best questions, I think. We haven't got accounts yet. We've still got these paper ledgers that we're just ticking off. These little abacus things that we're working from. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It really is a big deal because, it's only, 10, 15 years ago, if that at all. But, thousands, if not millions, were being spent on legacy systems and, having on-prem, solutions where, it comes as a huge, huge disruption. Not only is the technology massively disruptive to the market, but equally from the point of view of the manufacturers of all the legacy equipment and the depreciation within the organisation of purchasing the equipment needed to have the internal on-prem system. So it's a great article, David, and it really is one of those things that people do need guidance on, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think that ultimately, this is having law follow technology, and we saw this in the early days of the internet. Quite frankly, no one knew how to treat taxes in terms of internet-based sales, and so in other words, we had the ability we had to pay state, local, and government taxes on internet selling. The tax codes were convoluted. They were counteractive. In other words, in some place they were mutually exclusive. You're paying double taxes and things like that. And then finally, people got smart. The fact of the matter is it's a global economy now, and if we overtax people, they're going to buy from outside the country. And now it's not so much of an issue. It's simplified in terms of what you pay in terms of sales tax. If you have brick and mortar in a particular state, you have to pay tax. If you don't, you don't. And certainly Amazon's figured a way to get around lots of that, and I think that's going to continue. But this is something that's even further reaching, because even though the taxes on the internet sales affected the retail, this really kind of affects the bottom line in terms of what businesses are charged. And it's a global issue because we have international companies that are here in the States that are very concerned about how they are treated. And the fact of the matter is if they can't get the deductions that they need in the United States, guess what? It's cloud computing. They'll move it to a company overseas, perhaps Australia, perhaps China, some other country that's going to give them better tax benefits. And I think that's counterproductive for the companies that want to stay in the particular country. So what's your take on this, Ed?
Yeah, no, it absolutely. When the cloud first came out, there was a huge push on, hey, this is OPEX versus CAPEX. This is going to make life wonderful, which made all of the business owners really happy. But like you said, the folks in accounting that have to deal with the tax consequences of it and everything were having heart attacks on how do I deal with this? Wait a minute, you're getting rid of all of that equipment. I can't depreciate it anymore. I don't get the tax benefit from it. What's going on here? I'm losing. And so it's been a challenge. And like you said, we're in the global economy. If we're not going to get it right, other places are going to get it right, and people are just going to, they can host wherever they want with the cloud now. So somebody's got to get it right and make it attractive for people to want to keep doing it, and make it easy for people to want to keep doing it instead of it being a convoluted set of rules that nobody can figure out.
Yeah, and I think that companies are going to start gaming the system if it's not going to be adjusted in their favor, unless there's some sort of a least common denominator in terms of the way things are going to get taxed. So Brad, is this a concern in Australia? Do they are they taxing cloud computing differently, or is this something that just kind of fit right in the existing tax code?
Well, I think where government can tax, they will, and I think where businesses lose out, they will as well. I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? I think if they no longer have the on-prem depreciation of technology, then yes, it's felt everywhere globally. But going back to what you said about outsourcing even the services that Australia use to places like China with AliCloud, that obviously slims everything down a lot depending on obviously the level of depreciation. I don't think you can ever take away the level of depreciation that was being utilised by the accountants on legacy equipment based on your usage with regards to the minimal savings on cloud, etc., between AliCloud and Amazon, for argument's sake. But yeah, absolutely, it's felt everywhere. It's a huge impact to the business and the depreciation level of accountancy for sure. Australia feels it like everyone does, because we're all really playing on the same field now to a certain degree, bar the time difference. We're all kind of in the same ballpark, and that's a great thing. But equally, like you've said, from territory to territory, the tax laws are different, and that can really hurt different sizes organisations depending on what their reliance was on depreciation of their legacy systems.
Yeah, and we have the same thing here, where the states are trying to figure out how to tax cloud computing, which is something I think they should stay out of. Let the federal income tax take the money away from the state, from the businesses to do it. But the reality is they were getting sales tax from selling software and hardware in the States, and cloud computing is removing that from them. And of course, we have the same sort of thing with electric cars and gas taxes and things like that. So again, the technology is way ahead of the tax codes. And I think people are figuring out advantageous ways to get around the tax codes. So Ed, you live in Massachusetts. So what's kind of the feeling there in terms of how they're going to leverage cloud?
They're still trying to come to terms with it up here in Mass as well. I mean, and part of the struggle there, like it is just even at the federal level, is getting people in the legislature that understand what it is they're trying to deal with, so that they can come up with a reasonable way of addressing it from a taxing and accounting perspective. Like most things, unfortunately, most of the legislators in Mass, just like anywhere else, some of them are just getting used to using email. So the concept of cloud computing and hosting stuff halfway around the world just is not something they get their heads around. And I think that's going to create part of the struggle that we have until somebody can get in and explain to them exactly how this all works so that they can come up with a reasonable mechanism. I think there's going to be a lot of gyrations going back and forth until they figure out the right way to do it. Similar to like the example you had given around the internet sales taxes, where everybody in the world started charging sales tax on the sales that were happening, and that just became a non-starter from a business perspective.
Yeah, and I think that Congress put a moratorium on taxes for 5 years when it first started to take off, which is one of the reasons of the dot-com boom in the late 90s. Another thing is this is spawning a whole new industry. Believe it or not, there's CPAs that specialize in IT costs and how they should be treated, and tax lawyers that specialize in IT costs and how they should be treated. Just like a few years ago, I noticed a number of law firms that first had practices within the law firms that dealt with cloud computing-based business, and I used to serve as an expert witness for some of those. And now I think we're going to see accountants that specialize, in this technology and how it should be treated financially within the Global 2000 out there. That could save, at least $100 million, $200 million just based on the way whether it's cloud computing is treated one way or the other. So, Brad, you could be recruiting accountants in the next 5 years.
I think you're right. I think also that it's these things do create new job roles, new positions, things that were never there before, and I think it's really interesting to see how that pans out and play this one back, Dave, like the previous show, and see how right you were. Because I think it really is one of those things that the government implements certain things, and then there's a knock-on effect. There is that ripple effect again, and it creates a whole new level of work that was never there before, and a whole level of new special skills required. So it's definitely something that I think is going to be heavy in the future.
It just to add into that, and once they finally figure it out for the cloud, then the other disruptive technologies will throw a wrench into it. They'll have to figure out, how do we deal with the accounting for machine learning and for AI? How do we deal with the accounting for these other disruptive technologies out there?
Yeah, it'll be how artificial is your intelligence based on your tax code?
Oh, they start making AI learning models pay income tax like they're an employee because they have actual intelligence. So we'll see that coming. Sure.
I actually saw somebody write up about something about that not too long ago.
I think someone somewhere is going to get the AI in order to work out the tax returns and make sure that they're paying as less tax as possible for their cloud
H&R Block uses Watson, so.
Well, I just hit upon something that's interesting, because I do think that since we're having automation that's displacing humans, we have driverless cars coming. We have them now. We're going to see the more wide distribution over the next 3 or 4 years, and of course driverless trucks and all these things that used to take humans to do. So the government's going to lose taxability from displacement of those humans, not to mention someone's going to be out of a job, which is an issue unto itself, and hopefully we can train those people. But they're going to have to rethink the tax codes in order how to, I guess, put the tap on us in other ways to get the money that they used to need. And like we're seeing that as an analog in the electric car space. It used to be a couple of electric cars. They were kind of an anomaly. Now I probably pass 100 electric cars a day. And so they're not paying gas tax because they're not using gas. They are paying taxes on the electricity that they use, but that's not the same as gas tax. But they are using the roads. So how do they approach putting the putting the bite on those guys. And so as we have a changing economy and changing kind of technology that's shaping the economy, it's interesting to see if the government can actually keep up. I actually hope they don't, but it'll be interesting to see the way that they work. How are things down there in Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you hit an interesting point, and again, back to me being in Massachusetts here, because they started dealing with that particular type of issue just because cars were getting better gas economy, and so they weren't collecting as much from the gas tax, which is what they usually use for the roads. So Massachusetts has been looking at charging a miles-driven tax. And I think that would be a route they'd probably go with the electric cars on that, the amount of miles you drive, because your car's a big computer. We can get that information from your car, and then we can tax you on the number of miles you actually drive on our roads.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's what's happening down here as well. Further to your question, David. I think the Australian government are looking quite seriously at how electric cars are impacting the economy, the lack of taxation on fuel, etc., and also the let's say road use or damage they're causing to the roads. I don't think it's a huge amount of damage just yet with the volume of electric cars this side of the world, but essentially yes, they're looking, I think, at a mileage cost taxation. But you're absolutely right. They can download that, and they can. It'll be probably automatically uploaded to your account, and then the government will just go and say, "Well, there's your monthly tax."
Got to be a way to hack that.
There has to be a way.
There's always a way to hack it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's probably a way to hack it all, guys. Well, look, thanks so much. It was a great show. Thanks, Ed, for being a part of it. It's great to have you on board this week. It's fantastic. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Absolute pleasure. And thanks, Dave, as always. It's great to have you on board this week.
It's great to be here. Go pay your taxes.
Well, thanks for watching, everyone. And I hope you enjoyed this C-Suite show this week, which has been highly amusing and very insightful into the world of accounts for cloud computing with Ed Featherston and David Linthicum. You can catch Ed on Twitter, which is E.Featherston. David's on Twitter as well, which is at David Linthicum. And I'm on Twitter, which is at Nelson_Hilliard. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future videos with special guests, and also our weekly cloud computing news. Thanks again for watching.